Good evening. We're happy this evening to have Dr. Rhonda Janke with us, and she's in the horticulture program and works in horticulture and does a lot with sustainable agriculture and in the area of produce production, fruits and vegetables. There are lots of sustainability issues, and she's going to speak to us tonight on the general topic of sustainable agriculture, but looking at the things that she knows most about. Rhonda, thank you for coming. We appreciate your being here and doing this.
Thank you. Thank you, Larry. Well, I'm happy to be here as part of the sustainability series. I was actually one of the first people hired at K-State with the word sustainable in my job title. I think Larry's been here longer than I have, but I don't know if we ever compared notes on who had the word sustainable next to our name longest. But I've been here since '94 and grew up near Chapman, Kansas, so I'm a native Kansan. Did my bachelor's here, went to grad school at Cornell and came back here. Well, worked at Rodale for 8 years and then came back to Kansas, so kind of made a big loop. But I've combined my experiences in Kansas, in New York State, Pennsylvania, and then in Kansas to look at kind of a systems perspective of food. And the talk I'm going to give you tonight is about local food and what are the possibilities for local food here. So first of all, is anybody here an ag major? Anybody in the College of Ag? Anybody from a farm or have connections to farms? Okay. Okay, well, farming is just another way to use solar energy, right? So last week you guys heard talk about solar energy. Has anybody read Omnivore's Dilemma by any chance? Fast Food Nation? Heard about them? Super Size Me? King Corn? Okay, one of the premises of those books is that we're mostly made up of corn, and I'm not going to dwell a lot on corn tonight, but this crossed my desk just this week, that all those books that are talking about how much corn we're eating in fast food, now there's actually a peer-reviewed article in the National Academy of Sciences that proves it using carbon isotopes. So they looked at corn, the quantity of corn in fast food at Wendy's, McDonald's, and Burger King. And actually, McDonald's wasn't the worst. One of the others was. But that's kind of a side track. I do want to point out that in addition to my extension work, I've been doing some writing, and I also do some farming. And my husband Rod and I have a 10-acre farm in Wamego. And I interviewed people for a book about farming. It's called Farming in the Dark. And I'm going to talk about it in my talk, but I'll just pass around the book so you can see it's sort of stories. It's actual interviews with farmers and with other people about what's going on in agriculture. But I didn't write about our farm. There's another book edited by another K-State person, Tori Dickinson, where I did write about our farm. So if you ever do want to see more about what we're doing in Wamego, it's a chapter in Tori Dickinson's book. So these are just little sort of PR blurbs that I want to do here at the beginning, along with mentioning the intercession class, which will be a problem-solving class. It's called The End of Industrial Society and Agriculture as We Know It, but the idea is to sort of prevent that, to deal with it in a constructive way, not to necessarily forecast it and be all gloom and doom. So with that as an intro, I've got a series of slides, a lot of data, but feel free to ask questions as I go along, because I want to make sure the concepts are clear as I present them. Do I just advance the slides on the computer? Yeah. Rod, would you want to do that for me? That'll be easier, and that way I can sort of walk around a little more. Just sit here and just go like that. So, is one of these the lights? Okay. Yeah, these will show up better without the lights. So, just by way of kind of leading into the topic, one of the nice things about what's going on in society right now is that people are becoming more aware of food, and this book is one of the reasons. It's been on a bestseller list, And Michael Pollan is an excellent writer, and he's kind of bringing this topic to the general public, which, for a long time it's just been in sort of the academia. But one of the neat ways, the way he structured this book was he described 4 meals. And the McDonald's meal, the fast food was mostly corn, and he traces the beef back to corn, the chicken goes back to corn, the French fries were fried in corn oil, and the soft drinks were made out of corn syrup. Industrial organic is, everybody thinks organic is wonderful, and it doesn't use pesticides, but if you're buying industrial organic, you're not necessarily supporting a different kind of farming system. It's just organic instead of conventional, and you may have a lot of food miles in that. The third meal is what he calls local sustainable, and he uses a farm in Virginia as his local sustainable model. And we have a lot of that going on here in Kansas, and I'll point to some of it in my talk, but it's not labeled. It's hard to find local farms that are selling things locally. But it is sort of a national movement, but it's a little more subtle. And then there's self-provisioning, which means just grow it yourself or kill it. Question?
Yeah, what would be the difference between local sustainability, which you just said, and say farmer selling some produce to the farmer's market?
That's it. Exactly, that's it. If you go to Manhattan, has anybody been to the Manhattan Farmers Market? It's on 5th and Humboldt and Seco Park. Okay, so that's local sustainable, especially if you know how that person was growing the item. There's actually local unsustainable as well, but most of the farmers at the farmers market are sustainable in one way or another. Some use pesticides, some don't. Some take better care of their soil than others. Another question.
In industrial organic, they allow some use of pesticides?
No, industrial organic is no pesticides, but it's grown on a large scale, and it doesn't deal with sort of labor and social equity issues. It doesn't deal with like worker safety necessarily, and it's, how do I say, it's organic. It follows all the standards, all the rules by the book, but the principles of organic started out being sort of more small scale and medium-sized farms and supporting family farms, and the industrial organic is supporting sort of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 acre vegetable farms and labor from Mexico and things like that. So it's more has to do with the social system behind agriculture than the physical. Does that make sense?
Well, I just know that USDA organic still have use of agrochemicals like sulfur.
You can use, yeah, the organic label allows, I'm teaching a class right now on organic, so if anybody wants to learn more, I teach a 3-hour class every other fall. So, and we cover all the details of that. There are certain pesticides that are allowed in organic. Things like sulfur and copper are allowed as fungicides. Things like rock phosphate and blood meal are allowed as fertilizers. Certain plant-derived pesticides. But the list of things you can use in organic are things that usually degrade pretty quickly in the environment, and it's about this long, whereas the list of things you could use in conventional is like, books and books. So none of the synthetics, none of the nerve toxins are allowed in organic. But that's a good question. So, okay.
Could you define philosophical organic?
Philosophical organic would probably kind of a combination of 2 and 3. And in fact, there are, I don't go into it in this talk, but I have another talk on eco-labels where there are people who have added labels, like there's, free range can be added to organic. Organic requires a certain amount of daylight, and outdoor time for the animals. But there's a big, I don't know if you've read any of the milk controversy, there's a big difference between Horizon Organic and Organic Valley Organic milk. Horizon Organic, they have like 2,000 cow dairies, and Organic Valley, it's a co-op made up of farmers that each have about 50 cows. So it has to do with scale, it has to do, again, with sort of family ownership versus industrial scale. But, and then there's another sort of a fair trade label, like fair trade coffee, fair trade cocoa. There's a local sort of fair trade label that's being promoted for local, yeah.
Fair trade marketplace, about that.
Yeah, I should mention, yeah, go ahead. Do you know about it, or are you going to? Yeah, next week. Yeah, Tuesday, Wednesday at the Union. And the student farm, which I'm going to talk about later on in this talk, is going to have an educational table. So if anybody wants to find out about K-State's organic student farm, I think they're not going to sell vegetables there, but they're going to have a table and explain stuff. Okay, next. Oh, actually, these four, go back just one sec. These 4 meals, when I read about them, I thought, well, this would be really fun to do with a group of people. And I gave a talk similar to this at Unitarian Fellowship last summer. And I said, could we do this as a potluck? And they said, sure. And so we had a potluck where everybody had to bring one of these 4 categories. And then we had this long table set up with the fast food at one end and then the self-provisioning at the other end. And it was amazing. You could really taste the difference as you went down the table between these 4 categories. So that's a fun thing to do with a group of friends if you have people that like to have potlucks. So, okay, next. So then after Omnivore's Dilemma, people asked Michael Pollan, well, what should we eat? You know, you gave us 4 options and none of them seem exactly perfect and I don't have time to grow my own. And so he summarized his whole book in the title, Eat Food, Not Too Much, Mostly Plants. And then he gave us some food rules. Don't eat things that make health claims. For example, like cold cereal that says that it's healthy for you if it's just because it's low sugar, not no sugar, whatever. You are what you eat too. Like if you're eating animal products, what did the animals eat? Avoid things that don't rot or ingredients you can't pronounce. He talks a lot about omega-3 fatty acids, which are kind of they're being rediscovered. These are the fatty acids that are in fish and plants versus the omega-6s, which are in everything else. And there's a huge effect on, like every membrane in your body is made out of fat. And so whether you're eating 3s or 6s affects your whole body function, which people are just now realizing how important that is. And then don't eat anything your grandmother wouldn't recognize as food. And I thought that was sort of funny. We have a lot of sort of non-food items in the grocery store. Okay, next. Okay, how does this all tie back to sustainable agriculture? And I'm not going to go through all these boxes, but I've put together my own sort of taxonomy of sustainable agriculture, which falls under, sort of sustainable lifestyles. But sustainable agriculture is here as an umbrella term for a whole lot of different things that are different movements and different sort of branches on this chain of sustainable ag. Alternative ag is what we called it in the 60s and 70s, but it wasn't very well defined. It's like alternative to what? So then sustainable ag is also a little bit hard to define, but those of us that are part of it, we know what it is. Perennial polycultures and natural systems ag, the Land Institute in Salina, they're kind of part of alternative, kind of part of sustainable, but Wes likes to we'll give Wes his own branch. But organic is part of sustainable ag. Best management practices and whole farm planning are part of sustainable ag. Permaculture, in Europe they call it integrated farming. Other people sort of have their own branches, other terms and movements. And then all the food policy issues, the fair trade, local food policy councils, family farm advocacy groups, food security, those are all part of sustainable ag, not just the farming part. Okay, next. And of course, sustainable ag easily fits into the triple bottom line model that you've probably seen in previous lectures. So keep this in mind as you evaluate the next few things that I'm going to show you about what's going on in Kansas. Next. Okay, most of the food we eat in Kansas, as in the rest of the U.S., has traveled an average of 1,500 miles. And this was the Leopold Center report that did the calculations and documented this as a widely cited figure. Next. So what does that mean in terms of sustainability? Another thing is that if you look at how many vegetables we grow in Kansas and how many people we have, we don't grow very many vegetables. And you say, well, we don't have very many people. But we actually grow fewer vegetables per capita than almost every other state except like Wyoming, Alaska, and Idaho. I mean, we're 45 out of 50. We're really low on our vegetable production. We only grow 8% of our consumption, and that's at 2 servings a day. And we really should be eating 5 to 7 servings a day. So we're really not growing. We're not very self-sufficient. And not only Kansas, but the U.S. is a net importer of not just tropical crops, but a lot of temperate crops. And to some people, that's not a concern. They say, global systems work. If the economics dictate it, that's what we should do. Other people, and I'm probably one of them, says, well, I feel a little safer if my food's a little closer to home. So next, we'll see. Let's see what's going on in Kansas. Next. One of our projects is to say, let's consider a bioregion, and let's call the Kansas River Valley our bioregion, because that's where we are. And it's defined by about 10 counties on either side of the Kansas River, basically from Junction City to Kansas City, and we're right here. Here's Manhattan. Next. So what in those 10 counties, we've got 1.16 million people. That was on the previous slide, which is the total population of Kansas is only 2.7. So we've got 42% of the Kansas population just in those 10 counties, so it's a lot of people. Here's the breakout by county, if you want to see it. Here's the poverty level in those counties. You can see it varies quite a bit. Johnson County tends to be the lowest poverty level, highest per capita income. Wabaunsee County, no, it was Wyandotte is also an urban county in Kansas City, has the highest poverty rate and the lowest per capita income. So Kansas City is very, very varied. Here's this, but here's another interesting statistic to just pull off of here. We've got 42% of Kansas population in those 10 counties, and only 6.4% of the farmland. So, so if we're going to feed ourselves, in our bioregion, that's what we've got. Okay, next. How much do we eat? We're spending $2.8 billion on food just in those 10 counties. And that's from tax data that I got out of Topeka, sales tax data. And about 9%, or $261 million, spent on fruits and vegetables. So that's kind of the economic potential here for fruits and vegetables that we're not tapping into. And that's about a little bit under $2,000 per person. Next. And you can break it out by county. I don't know why, but 42% of the people are eating 50% of the food in the state. And here's food breakout per person. You see it varies a lot by county, but I think some of that has to do with where the grocery stores are. For example, Riley County, we've got 1709. Shawnee is 22. Wyandotte is less. Wabaunsee is a pretty rural county, and I don't know that there's very many places to shop in Wabaunsee County. So some of this is just where the grocery stores are. And about half of that, of the total amount spent on food, I don't have it on the slide, but about half of that is food that's eaten at home or purchased at grocery stores, and half of it is restaurants and eating out. Next. So, okay, we've got that 2.8 billion, and we've got 7,000 farms, 2.3 million acres of farmland, and about 50,000 acres are irrigated. And that's an important number to look at if you're trying to figure out if we can grow enough food. So. This is the 10 counties still. Yeah, these are our 10 counties. Okay, next. Here's the breakout by county again. Farmland and acres. There's total land, there's farmland, which excludes all the forest and rangeland. Farmland includes the rangeland. Cropland would be just things that could be plowed or tilled. And then acres of irrigated land. And if you look at what we've got in the state, we've only got 11% of the farms, 5% of the farmland, 4% of the cropland, and 2% of the irrigated land in our valley. Okay, next. Okay, so how much really good land is there? Next. Well, cropland isn't just cropland. There's class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And it's a system of grouping soils. So soil scientists have divided soils up into different categories, or they have different names and characteristics, and then they're lumped in these categories. Next. Class 1 is the best land, few limitations to use. That's what you want if you're going to grow vegetables. Class 2 has some limitations. It might require moderate conservation practices. It can use for cultivated crops. 3 and above, there are severe restrictions to cropping, and really that's your rangeland and your forest land. You shouldn't be growing crops there. So where are the class 1 and 2 lands? Okay, next. All right, so this is the same slide as before, but here's the class 1 acres by county and the percent of total acres that are class 1 This isn't the percent of farmland, but the percent of total acres in the county. You can see it's pretty minimal, ranging from like 3% in Douglas. Where's Riley? Riley's 4%. The highest is Shawnee. That's the county that Topeka's in, has a lot of Class 1 land. Well, Buncie's the smallest. So there's Class 1 land. It's only about 3% of the land in the valley. So here's the Google Earth photo of the same Kansas River Valley. Here's Manhattan, and the Class 1 land is in red. You'll notice an interesting thing about the pattern of it. That's what we call in agriculture, that's bottomland. That's the land that is right close to the river. It's usually well drained, very flat, very fertile. But that's, if you've ever driven Highway 24, that's where they build the factories and the housing. So some of this land has been built up. Here's Shawnee County. You can see all that Class 1 land along the river there. Lawrence has a nice little chunk of it in North Lawrence, and there's actually a big kind of controversy going on in Lawrence over preservation of that land. Manhattan, between here and Tuttle Creek, is our best land, and that's right where the student farm is located, about right in here. And then there's some along the Smoky Hill. Okay, next. This is the Class 2 land in yellow, and you can see it's also mostly in the river bottoms, but it also includes a lot of the creek bottoms, some of the smaller little pockets of land. So that's also good ag land. Next. If you put them both on the same slide, that's what it looks like. Next. You do a little bit more close-up. Here's Riley and Geary County again. So you can see right kind of along the river, Fort Riley and Junction City are right along there. And again, between here and Tuttle Creek, below the dam, is some of our best land. Pottawatomie County's got some. Next. This is Shawnee County. So all along Topeka, and I don't know if you've ever heard I did a little bit of background research in the Kaw language. There's a professor at KU that has translated a lot of the Kaw Indian words, and the word for Topeka was called Topeka-ga in the Kaw language. It means place to dig good potatoes. So I think that there were probably some sort of wild root crops growing here that the Native Americans were aware of. And then here's Lawrence with that land right where they have the airport north of Lawrence. Okay, next. Okay, so we've got all this land, we've got all these farmers, and 2.8 billion are these farmers getting rich. How much money do they make? Next. Well, as it turns out, even though we spent 2.8 billion on food, the farmers are only bringing in 262 million. So that's gross. But they spent 272 million to grow those crops. So they actually lost $10 million. And these are 2002 Census of Ag numbers because that's the most recent updated census. The difference, that 10 million difference, was made up with 13 million in government subsidies, 11 million in off-farm income, or other farm income. But farming in the River Valley is not as profitable as you might initially think. Question?
Are some of these large-scale operations and the subsidies go to these corporations?
Exactly.
That are not necessarily.
Because a lot of those food dollars are going to, well, some of that, if it's a restaurant dollar, it's part of it's paying for the service as well as the actual food. And then you're buying, high-value foods like fruits and vegetables. The foods that are being grown here are largely wheat, corn, milo, soybeans. They're sold as commodity crops, usually for very low prices. And then those grain farms are the ones that get the subsidies. Fruits and vegetables are not subsidized. Grain crops are. And then indirectly, beef and pork are subsidized because the grain is cheap. Now there's the ethanol thing going on too. But question?
What would be an example of this situation with other farming towns?
If somebody is a hired hand on somebody else's farm, or if they rent their baler out to somebody, sort of custom work, things like that. Sometimes people will own some land and then rent some land, all these combination. Okay, next. But it's usually farm-related income. Off-farm jobs is a whole other category, which is actually quite large. So here are those numbers, again, just broken out by county, but to summarize, This is the total products sold was 37. Oh, I'm sorry, that's dollars per farm. Per region, it was 261, but they spent 271, so there's that minus 10 was our net income. Government payments, other farm income, and then total net was only 13,000, or 13,000 times 1,000 over the region, which on a per farm basis doesn't look like very much. Part of that has to do with farm size and averaging, though. Okay, next. Okay, so how many of these farms are growing fruits and vegetables? Actually, go back one just a sec. Actually, go back a couple more. I think there were, what, 7,000 farms?
Yes.
Is that what I said? Okay, keep going then. I have two different versions of this talk. I got to remember which. I have one where I have 7 counties and one with 10 counties. Okay, so of the 7,000 farms, 107 are raising vegetables and 90 are raising fruit. So not very many. It's pretty tiny. And it's only 827 acres, so it's pretty small farm size, again, on an average basis. Next. Here are the numbers broken out by county. So Riley County, I mean, you can count them on almost one hand, 6 farms. Pottawatomie County only has 4. And Rod and I are one of them, and we have like a half acre of vegetables. I mean, we count as we have a 10-acre farm, but only a half acre of vegetables. But we count on this survey. So here's the 107 farms, 827 acres, fruit farms, acres of fruit. And I'm going to come back to these numbers, and we're going to see how many people we can feed with that. Next. Okay, so how close are we to feeding ourselves? Next. So the way I did that was I went around and asked every single person how much they ate. No, I'm just kidding. The best way I could figure out to do that was ERS, the Economic Research Service, has a database of per capita consumption averages for fruits and vegetables. So for asparagus, for example, their database says on average, U.S. people eat 1.5 pounds per person per year. So I just took all the fruits and vegetables that I could find per capita consumption figures for times the 1 point, actually it should be, sorry, 1 point, yeah, no, is that 1 point, it should be 1.6 people per region. So that's how many pounds we need in the region. Then you divide by the average yield per acre to get how many acres you need. And then I also did, what if we only had, say, 15%? Instead of 100%, and then I did that for 26 vegetables, and then I looked at the Kansas statistics to see, okay, how many are we growing? So, and I had enough data in all these sources to do 26 vegetables. Next. And here's what I found, and these numbers are too small to read all of them, but the summary, the bottom line is we only have 827 acres in the region, plus another 1,200 or so in potatoes. So we have, if you count potatoes in there, we have about 2,000 acres of vegetables. But if you add up the acres, everything from asparagus to watermelon, we need about 25,000 acres. So that's where I got that 8% figure, the 214 divided by 25,000. We need at least 3,700, almost 4,000, just to grow 15%. If we wanted to just say, okay, we're just going to buy local in the summer, let's say, just a couple months a year. So we need to double our production just to get up to 15%. So, and if you look at it by vegetable, the only thing, okay, here's how many acres we need in the region, and here's how many acres we have in Kansas total, not just the region, because I actually couldn't find the number of acres of each individual vegetable in the counties because there aren't enough farms for them to track the data. So I had to use the statewide statistic. Okay, so for asparagus, for example, we need 697 acres, and we only have 54 acres in the whole state. Another thing that's real easy to grow is sweet potatoes. We need 523 acres of sweet potatoes in our valley to feed ourselves, and sweet potatoes are easy to grow, they're easy to store. We used to grow them a lot, 100 years ago, but we've only got 29 acres in the whole state. The only thing we're halfway self-sufficient on is turnips. We only need 19 acres, and we have 27 turnips. 27 acres of turnips in the state. Pumpkins, we have 705 acres, and we only need 484. And Irish potatoes, we're sort of close. We have 3,700 acres, and we need 6,000. But I mean, pumpkins, people don't even really eat the pumpkins that much. They decorate with them. So, I mean, we can't eat. So anyway, these statistics, the more you look at them, the more depressing they get. But because we can grow, these are all things we can grow. They're not tropical crops. Okay, next. Okay, so can we grow 25,000 acres of vegetables? Well, we have 50,000 acres of irrigated land, and we have 95,000 acres of Class 1 land, if we pretend like it hasn't been developed, and I don't have those figures. And we need 25,000. Okay, next. So we have enough land, theoretically. Next. We've got 2,000 acres now. If you go back to the old census of ag, we had 4,000 acres in 1950. We had 20,000 acres in 1920, and we had 33,000 acres in 1910. So we actually did grow enough vegetables. So the theoretical actually happened in 1910. Okay, next. Statewide, now I'm going to jump from region to state again. Here's 1910. The red line are the sweet potatoes, and these are in acres. The green line would be vegetables that aren't potatoes. The yellow line are potatoes, and the blue line is the sum of all of those. So 1910 seemed to be the peak. If you go to 1900 and 1890, it drops down again. 1910 was about the peak. But by 1925, pretty big drop. 1950, another big drop. It just kind of keeps having and just getting lower and lower. Okay, next. And I've mainly been showing you the vegetable data. Fruit, it's pretty much the same story. Next. These are number of apple trees in counties. Each of the counties from 1910 to the present. You can see we just kind of fade off into infinity there. Next. If you look at the number of acres that we need, like apples, we need almost 5,000 acres for our region, and the whole state of Kansas only has 600, so we're pretty deficient. I'm not sure if there's much else on here. It's just low, low, low. Okay, next. Again, those are all temperate crops. Those are things we can grow. So to summarize the fruit data, we would need about 2,000 acres if we only were growing 15% of our needs. We need 14,000 acres for all of the valley's fruit. In 1920, they had 11,000, and in 1910, they had 25,000. So again, if you look at the historic data, we were growing more than enough. We were a net exporter because obviously we didn't have that many people in the valley in 1910. So that's not even counting. We would need more acres if we were trying to grow oranges and things that we can't grow here. But, you know, and they think, well, it's okay. They grow this stuff in Florida. They grow this stuff in California. They grow it in Texas. It's not a big deal. But then if you look at FAO data, most of these are USDA data sets. If you go to FAO website, they've got all the imports and exports. Next. And they have U.S. production. They have how many crops are exported. And if you look at these figures, they don't look too bad. You know, the U.S. was producing, these are in metric tons now, these data. So apples, we were growing 4 million metric tons of apples. We were exporting 1.4 million metric tons of apples, apricots, all these, it looks like we're growing and exporting. Next. But we're also importing at the same time. And so if you take production minus, let's see, production minus imports. Okay, no, wait. I can't do my math. The production minus exports plus imports. Next slide. You can get the net. So how much are we retaining? And we're actually a net exporter of cherries and these other fruits, but we're a net importer of grapes, apricots, and apples to the tune of 60%, or 58% of our apples, 67% of our apricots, and 27% of our grapes. And that's U.S. And you can say, well, you could argue, well, like grapes, maybe it's off-season. Like in the wintertime, it's nice to buy our grapes from Chile. But apples, you can grow you can store apples 12 months a year in a cooler. You don't need to import apples, except everybody wants these New Zealand pink ladies or whatever. So, okay. Huh?
They're good.
They're very good. Yeah, but you haven't had one of my apples yet, so we should have brought samples. We've got a whole cooler full of apples. Huh? Well, we have a very small, like a half-acre orchard, and the traditional apple varieties were Jonathan. What are Ben Davis is one that we, there are some antique varieties. Liberty. The ones we have in our orchard are actually newer sort of relatives of those that have been bred to be disease resistant. So on an organic farm, we have varieties called Liberty and Enterprise that are kind of, Liberty is related to Jonathan and it's a red apple. Enterprise is related to Golden Delicious and it's a yellow apple. So they're ones that you don't really see in the store, but they're easy to grow locally, but they taste just as good. Next.
Does this include fruit that's shipped in to be made into fruit drinks, or is this just people eating apples?
I think this I'm guessing this includes all apples and apple products because I know,
A lot of juices on
because,
apples and pears and grape juice.
right, especially the apple juice. A lot of if you look at apple juice imports, a lot of it's coming from China. A lot of our honey's coming from China. You'll be surprised how many. In fact, I read recently that organic peanut butter is coming from China. You'd think we can grow organic peanuts. Yeah?
Doesn't China have a whole lot of like issues with standards here? Like I've heard about the melanie.
Yeah, it makes you wonder because there have been just enough sort of slip-ups and things that we've caught that it makes you wonder what are we not catching. And you can't tell from the news media if those are actually accidents or if they're just trying to get away with stuff or what. So yeah, the percent of our imports that are coming from China would be very suspect. Okay, next. Vegetables are even worse. Pretty much every single vegetable, I think, except pumpkins and watermelons are imported, net imports. I mean, yeah, we're growing a lot. Okay, so we're growing, 1 million metric tons of asparagus and we're exporting it, but we're importing more than we're exporting. And again, you can argue, well, some of this is off-season. You want to import in the winter. But anytime it gets more than 50%, that's not just off-season imports. And potatoes, why are we importing potatoes? We can store, again, these crops that we can store, it just boggles my mind why we would import them. Garlic is imported from China. So anyway, just next. And then another thing you can do is a colleague of mine, Pete Garfinkel, who's helping with some of this local food project. He dug up some neat historical photographs at the K-State Library. So here are some strawberry statistics from 1930, just how many quarts of strawberries that were coming out of various counties. And every few years you need to renovate a strawberry bed. So this is how they did it with horses. And this is before they invented chiropractors. So he's in there. Okay, next. These are photos of early raspberry production. I mean, just look at the size of this field. I mean, it's not just one row of raspberries. And again, these are, substantial numbers of quarts coming out of these counties. And there's a few U-pick places around, but they're far and few between. I think I know of like one. There's Gary's Berries right on 24. But next, your question?
Would those have been organically grown, or would they have already had
That's a good question. Fruit is a very interesting thing because we have this perception that if it was grown in 1910, it was probably organic, but they were using arsenic and what was the other one? Some cyanide products actually on fruit. And so you got to really you can't assume that these were organic. The fertilizers were probably organic, but the pesticides weren't necessarily. And they were using some, like lead arsenate. So there would be, sometimes old orchards even have lead residues in the soil. So these weren't necessarily pure crops. Okay, next. But a lot of these are so well adapted to Kansas that we do have organic growers growing these successfully now. Apples are a little tricky. Pears are pretty easy. Raspberries are easy. Strawberries are easy if you rotate. So a lot of these can be grown organically now. The whole valley, and especially Wamego, where we live, used to be called the sweet potato capital of the Midwest. They were producing, 2,500 acres in 1910, And as I said before, we only have 29 acres now. And they would ship them out in rail cars because the best soils, as you saw, were along the river. That's right where the railroad track is. And apparently there was a broker in Kansas City who had connections in Chicago. And so he was moving all these sweet potatoes out of Kansas. And then when the highways came in and it became feasible to ship out of the Carolinas and Georgia and places like that, then they outcompeted Kansas. Next. Okay, so why don't we just sort of like reinvent this food system, right? Is it profitable? And if you look at on a per acre basis, the answer is kind of a tentative yes. Here's corn and soybean and wheat, gross income, costs, and net income. If you're growing field crops, these commodity crops, you make a little bit per acre, and that's why everybody has a lot of acres. Vegetables, I put together 16 different vegetable budgets to get kind of an average figure. Your gross is about $9,000 an acre, which looks like a lot compared to field crops. Your net or your costs are also high, but then your net's not too bad, $2,600. So it competes well with field crops, but that's got to pay for your labor. The question is, does it? Okay, next. And we don't have good budgets in Kansas because we don't have enough vegetable producers. But Wisconsin put together some budgets, and for vegetable farms ranging from half an acre to 70 acres. They had 19 farms, 3 years of data, and their gross sales ranged from $6,000 to $25,000. Their net ranged from $1,000 to $9,000, which looks pretty good, $4,700 per acre. That's pretty comparable to the previous chart. But then when they figured out their hours, the hourly wage for the farmer was only $2 to $16. And the average for the 19 farms was $7.45. And so, as far as I can tell, that's why we don't have more fruits and vegetables in Kansas. Nobody wants to work for $7.45. Nobody wants to work that hard for $7.45. Next. It will barely, make $15,000 a year, which health insurance, if it costs $13,000 a year, you can't even pay your health insurance. And I think we're still kind of in denial about the fact that it isn't profitable enough, because what I'm hearing from even people in ag econ is, well, farmers just like to complain a lot, or it's a lifestyle choice to farm, or maybe they should be more efficient. Well, maybe they should, to be more efficient, they'd have to live in California or Mexico, which is what some farmers do, is they're moving their operations to Mexico. Even Brits outside of town and Barber's Market that you see at Farmers Market, they've got farms that they're considering buying in Mexico. Next. So what's happening is people are leaving the profession. They're leaving farming. If you compare 25 years ago to 2002, total farm numbers have gone down. This middle-sized farm was 42%, now it's 26% of farms. A few of them have gotten bigger. The large farm category has gotten bigger. The small farm category has gotten bigger. And average age of farmer has gone from 50 to 55. So some people go into farming, the small farms is kind of their retirement income. And so it's not, it's not like a career choice for people anymore. It's kind of it's more of, like I said, it's kind of a lifestyle choice, which is that really how we want our food system to be based on. Next. And it's not just fruits and vegetables, and it's not just the last couple of years. These are data that Ken Meter presented here in Kansas for the eastern Kansas River Valley region, and these are all farms in the River Valley. Their expenses are the brown line, their receipts are the yellow line. So this is the income, expenses, and this is their net, okay? And this is zero. So as you can see, from 1969 through 2005, net income was just barely, it was only above zero really in the 70s. And then here's the farm crisis of the 80s. And then here's a couple good years. And then look where it is now. And it's not in the news anymore. This is unadjusted dollars. If you adjust for inflation, next. It's just a downward trend. Question?
What happened in 1997 and 98 to cause that drop there?
The 97 and 98. I'm going to say expenses may have gone up was going to say some of these back here, I can talk about, the Russian embargo and this and that. I'm trying to remember 97 and 98. Go back one slide. Let me look at the. You mean this?
The receipts went down, which means you probably had a poor crop.
Prices, yeah. Poor crop. I was trying to remember if one of those was a drought year or not. The flood was 93. Those might have been some dry years. We had a couple hot years. Prices have just kind of been at the bare minimum until just the last 2 years. In 2007, they came up some, but now they're back down again. I had to think about that. I don't know the answer. Okay, next. The prices are usually, if you look at, except for the last 2 years, if you look at the prices of most of these commodities, it's at or below the break-even price. And that's when the government programs kick in and they make up the difference. Question?
Do you think government intend to do this to keep prices low because it's a good stock?
Yep, exactly. Exactly. Okay, so these are adjusted, and then these are the four, basically only 4 positive years since 1977. But thankfully, my parents were farming in the 70s, and my brother and I came to college in 76 and 78, and my dad decided we were milking cows, and my dad said, I don't want to milk cows if I don't have my kids at home to help milk. So he sold the cows like in 78 or 79, and then my parents decided to go back to school and change careers. So they got out right before the 80s. If they'd been in farming in the 80s, we probably still wouldn't have the farm. As it is, we do have the farm. My cousins are farming it. But my brother and I both went on to do other things because there was no money in farming. So, okay, next. And it's not just Kansas. You might say, well, maybe we're just not very good farmers. It's the whole country. All the counties colored in yellow are net negatives. The ones in red are like really, really negative. The only counties making money are in green and this sort of light brown. And you look where they are. They're right along the border to Mexico. And it turns out this one county in Arizona, people drive back and forth from Mexico every day to bring in the labor. And so a lot of the fruits and vegetables now are grown here because of the cheap labor coming in from Mexico. Some of the red counties are in urban areas, where farmers are selling. That would be Chicago, Minneapolis, etc. Okay, next. So that's kind of why I wrote this book called Farming in the Dark. And I originally wrote it because of everybody like me who goes home, like tonight we'll go home and feed our sheep in the dark. So a lot of people are doing this part-time because they like to grow food, but you've got to have a day job. Another reason I call it Farming in the Dark is because maybe we're not farming with enough information. A lot of farmers have never seen those statistics. They think they're the only one losing money, and then they don't tell anybody because they're embarrassed. They don't realize that everybody's not making any money. So if we all got together, and did something about it. But now with energy prices and, fossil fuel shortages, we may be literally farming in the dark, with fewer fossil fuels. Next. So I created, I wrote the book based on these interviews and created a website and a wiki. So if anybody has any comments about any of this, you're welcome to log into the wiki and comment. And the website's just called farminginthedark.net, and then there's a place to click to get to the wiki. It's a wet paint wiki. Next. I interviewed 70 people. It was the fall of 2005. I had a 6-month sabbatic. And I asked them what we did right and what we did wrong over the last 25 years, and included farmers. And this first book is about the farmers. And then I'm going to write a sequel where I include the university researchers, NGO activists, government employees, consumers, etc. Next. Some of the quotes I got, Nancy Vogelsberg, who sells her beef down at People's Grocery, said, "We're not farming in the dark, we're dancing in the dawn." She's trying to put a positive spin on it. Dan and Mary Howell up in Frankfurt, have this big attachment to the land. Selling land is like when you're selling one of your kids. George and Melanie DeVault are in Pennsylvania, and it's a rapidly urbanizing area. Prices are going up. They're putting in a sewer system in their county. They can't pay the taxes on farm income. Jim Bender was interesting. He's one of the most successful farms I've visited. He's organic. He's in Nebraska. And he knew I was from a land-grant university, and he works with people at University of Nebraska, but he said, don't give them an ag degree. Get them a liberal arts background. We need more farmers with liberal arts backgrounds. Rich Bennett was one of our model on-farm research collaborators in Ohio at Rodale when I was there, and he got out of farming. He said he's a county commissioner, and he says, I'm into a different kind of pork now. And Carmen Fernholtz said the problem is capitalism. It doesn't allow us to care for the land property. It's sort of this cutthroat, low-price system. Next. Some of the nonprofits, a lot of them work very closely with farm bills and try to get green payments and things into the farm bill. Margaret Crome says we need to do a little more dancing with the devil. Dan Nagengast said, are we really helping farmers or just perfecting hell? One of the most constructive comments was from Ferd Hefner, who says, let's just get more urban people represented on the ag committee, because if you only have farm interests, you're just going to keep everything the same. You really need consumers on the farm and the ag committees. Next. Self-critique is that we haven't really been talking enough about food and health, except for J.I. Rodale had a lot of early writings. We don't have the medical community, like, is our hospital buying local food? No. We're offering economic assistance to farmers in the form of business planning, but in terms of overall profitability, as you saw from the statistics, it's not profitable without some sort of subsidy, which again the grain farmers are getting and nobody else is. Next. So again, it doesn't look like it but I am winding to a close here. Another way people have tried to make money at farming is by doing value added, like not just raising the grain, but raising chickens, turning the grain into chickens, and then actually selling the meat. And we've worked on these, clever little pasture poultry systems where you move the cage every few days. There are these on-farm butchering stations. It's legal in Kansas to process 3,000 chickens a year and sell them locally without having a meat license or something. So this trailer is called Death on Wheels. So you can buy locally raised chickens, and Rod and I have done that sometimes, but it's just a ton of work. And so even charging, $3 or $4 a pound, we barely pay the cost for us to slaughter them, let alone raise them and the grain. And so when you buy a chicken at the store, you're paying below the cost of production in terms of what it would cost to raise it locally. Next. Are these free-range chickens? Not anymore. Next. So what do we do in the next 25 years? So we are going to have to deal with the reality of higher cost of oil, shrinking groundwater reserves, and uncertain climate variation. And that's what we're going to talk a lot about in the intersession class. I find students continue to be attracted to sustainable ag and the organic farming in the classes that I teach. But they're probably going to have to consider some sort of parallel career track if they want to go into farming, because I just don't see, it's really difficult to push numbers around and try to make $50,000 a year. There are some encouraging signs with renewed interest from consumers and institutions. There are a few school districts starting to buy local. Wamego School District is buying some local food. Next. In terms of the land-grant universities, I'd say the people that I interviewed for this book were probably the harshest on the universities. One quote was, we need to shift from a therapeutic intervention approach to system resilience. And therapeutic intervention means like some sort of after the fact, the silver bullet thing. We need to build systems that are resilient. Another person said, if change does not take place in the next couple of decades, the land grants will have outlived their usefulness. The old model isn't going to work anymore. Our public universities are complicit in their own demise. Thus, people like Larry and I are trying to reinvent the university from the inside out. Another person said, right now we probably have less than 1% of our research dollars going into sustainable ag. Another person said we need at least 30%. But he said, instead of that, we're focusing on the next generation of inappropriate technologies. Next. And as consumers, we're probably kind of eating in the dark. We don't always really know what we're consuming or where it came from. Next. But what are the solutions? So first is we got to sort of face what's going on. We can't just live in la-la land or pretend like this isn't going on. Next. And there are some positive trends, like there's a Buy Fresh, Buy Local campaign in Kansas City, and there's going to be one in the Kansas River Valley pretty soon. We've got license for that label now. Here at K-State, we created this website called Kansas River Valley Foods. It's a place for farmers to post food that they have for sale. 2 local people that buy our food and buy a lot of other people's local food. Adicia's Bakery and Cafe down on Points tries to buy local as much as possible. Rod just sold them some tomatoes and apples this morning, so if you go in and eat their tomato soup, tell them how wonderful it is. Morningstar Bed and Breakfast, they buy our eggs every week. Next. Our student farm is growing locally. We've had great success selling at Saturday Market. We're going to sell Friday, tomorrow morning, out on the Ag Quad, so in front of Leisure Hall. The student farm will be selling produce. The problem is because of the inexpensive food coming in from out of state, we can't compete in terms of selling it to the dining hall. Like we tried to sell some to Derby, and they're only buying lettuce for 65 cents a head. And that's pre-cut. And we're selling our lettuce like this at the farmer's market for $2 a head. So there's no way we're going to sell it for 65 cents. And we also can't make any money at 65 cents. So she said, well, we'll give you $1 a head. But again, why would we take a 50% cut for that? So we said, well, thanks, but no thanks. In fact, we can sell it. We're selling it, some of our leftovers to the zoo right now for $1.50 a pound, which is more than Derby would pay. But next. Yeah. They say, well, we just have to look at our budgets. And I don't know, they just give us some answer like, yeah, I think that if students requested it, like what some universities have done, is they have like at least one of the lines with local food, or one night a week with local food, or at least one item on the salad bar with local food, so that at least there's an option. You can't like switch everything overnight. But if enough students asked for it, they would have to do it. But if people seem to not really care, they're just going to buy whatever's the cheapest. And that's what we're up against, price-wise. I did actually some research on that 65 cents a head, and I said, how could it be that cheap? And current prices out of California, the farmers are only getting 40 cents a head in California, and it costs 19 cents a head to ship it here. And so so that's 60, and then there's a nickel or so added in for the broker and whatever else. So that's 65 cents a head. That's what it costs out of California. Okay. Huh? Oh, this was an email from Aaron Yoder, and he was an email from him to me saying, are we going to sell it to Derby or not? This is what I found out. And then at our farm meeting, we meet every Monday to make decisions about the farm. And we said, no, we don't want to sell it for that. So we did sell Kramer a little bit of food last week at decent prices, but it was enough food for like 20 people. It wasn't like for the whole dining center. It was just like a special dinner kind of thing. And this January 23rd meeting, if we have any food in January, we'll sell it to him. But January 23rd, it's not an easy time of year to sell local food or to have anything to sell. Okay, next. But there are some successful models of communities trying, it's sort of community support for agriculture, even if the Farm Bill isn't supporting it. So Intervale, Vermont, well, Sustainable Seattle is making local food a priority in their sort of their sustainability endeavors. Intervale, Vermont has a piece of land that they own, and these are all farms that they've created. So they have incubator farms and CSAs that are supported by the community. And then in Colorado, there's this investor group called Agriburbia, where they design housing districts with farms in them, natural areas and farms sort of built into them. It's sort of hypothetical at this point. Next. So how do we, use these positive trends? Next. One way is to work on local policy. If we had a city council and, county commissioners who all said we want local food and we want local farms, there are policy models out there that we could look to. Next. Oh, this is the Agriburbia website. Next. This is an actual development that I visited one time in Chicago, which is sort of modeled after that Agriburbia. It's called Prairie Crossing. It's got housing, it's got natural area, and it's got a farm with a CSA that serves the people that live in the housing district. So you can live within walking distance of your food. Next. And then this, the American Planning Association now has a guide that just came out, it's 2007, about local food. It says food is a sustaining and enduring necessity. And it goes on to say that as planners, we haven't really thought about it, but now we need to. Next. They have 2 overarching goals and 7 general policies that basically say we need comprehensive food planning and support food systems. And they talk about health and equitability and justice and all that stuff. Next. And then another town that has put this into action, this was in the New York Times, October 7th of this year, Hardwick, Vermont. Used to be a mining town, they had granite companies, and now they're trying to rebuild the town based on local food. So they've got this, there's a company called Pete's Greens, they've got some cheese farmers, just a whole collection of different types of sort of artisan foods that are trying to make this town like a destination, a place to visit. Next. So we try to look in the mirror and see what's going on, and we end up with a big puzzle. And then these are my photo credits and sources for the data. Next. And other sources for the data. I'll just stop on that slide. So I guess I went 1 minute over. But I appreciate your questions and comments, and I'll be happy to stay around and answer any other
more
questions that you have.
Yes.
Question. When you were going over the data for the different farms per county,
Mm-hmm.
you said your farm was one of the 4
Mm-hmm.
in the 10-county area.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a cutoff that you have to meet to be considered in that, or how you grow, that an apple tree, how exactly? You said you had a half an acre.
I think to fill out a census of ag form, you have to have filed a Schedule F tax form.
Okay.
That's how they define farm. And so you probably wouldn't do that for 10 apple trees, but we literally only have a half acre of apples. We only have 50 trees. And same thing with vegetables. We only have about a half acre of vegetables.
So they just do it on your file.
And then we have 20 sheep and 35 chickens. I mean, it's a tiny, tiny farm. I figured out our total production one time in tons, and we grow actually several tons of, if you add up the fruits, the vegetables, the meat, and the eggs, but then I divided by the per capita consumption, it's only enough for 7 people, But yeah, to be a farm, I think if you file a Schedule F, you fill out the census of ag.
Okay.
So, because there are a lot of people growing food in gardens. You can grow a ton of food in just a little tiny spot. So.
I know we spend, like the U.S., 16% of our income on food. Like, what systems would you have to find to try to really, it's really an attack on the market system?
What?
What would you have to do to break through that system of the system we've set up for this country?
Well, one thing is we actually spend only 11% of our income on food, not 16. I think it's been going down over the years. Well, it might be up a little bit now, but half of that is eating out. And I think half of the food that we eat at home, if you looked at what people actually buy at the grocery store, they're empty calories. And so a lot of this some of this has to happen at home. People have to make decisions to buy fruit juice instead of pop, or to buy an apple instead of pop, or whatever. So there are ways to spend the food dollar on actual food rather than non-food. But those are personal decisions that people make. As a society, I just don't, the Farm Bill is moving slowly in the direction of green payments versus subsidies. And Europe has gone to a green payment system where they say, we want to keep farmers on the land and pay them for keeping open space, clean water, and clean air. And so like Switzerland just pays them a flat fee. They say, here's some money, we want you to farm. And that way, at least if they don't get enough money from the marketplace, they still have money to live on. And so we could say we just want to support farmers no matter what they grow, or if they grow certain things or grow it in a certain way. So we could work on a green payment system at the national level. At the local level, there might be ways to subsidize entry-level farmers by giving them free or cheap land. Just the mortgage to buy a farm is huge, and you just never get rid of it. If you make it a huge land purchase. There might be ways to subsidize health insurance for farmers, pay off student loans. Doctors and lawyers that go to underserved regions get their student loans paid back. So maybe there would be ways, there are other ways to get people in agriculture and make them successful at it besides, just, there are a lot of ways to support local food. So we just got to put together different options, I think. I don't have a clear one-size-fits-all answer. Does that make sense?
I have a sign-up list for giving your oral presentation at the end of the semester, so if anybody wants to sign that, please go ahead and do that.
Did you have stream home makeovers in Chapman?
Did I what? Yeah, I saw that. I don't know the family, but
It'll be down on Monday.
yeah, that was pretty neat. I grew up actually 9 miles south of Chapman, so I don't know some of what they call the townies.
Yeah.
But yeah.